Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Wednesday, February 25th, 2026.
Thanks for having me back.
Of course. And usually a random Wednesday in February is just, the day you're trying to get over the hump of the week.
Right.
But looking at the stack of research on the desk today, this date, February 25th, it isn't just a calendar square. It's actually this massive historical anchor.
It really is. It's one of those dates that just seems to magnetically attract significant events.
Yeah.
We're looking at a concept today from a source called Architectural Spaces, which describes something they call the unbroken chain of power.
I really like that phrasing, the unbroken chain. It implies that these events aren't just isolated incidents, but actual links in a longer narrative.
Exactly. The premise here is that February 25th connects four massive pillars of the African-American experience. You've got the University, the Senate, the literary world, and the airwaves.
Mm-hmm.
It's this timeline that traces how the diaspora moved from the margins of society, literally the fields and the service entrances, right to the masthead of power.
So just to give you the roadmap as you're listening, we are tracking 4 specific events that all align with the state.
Right.
We start with the founding of Cheyney University in 1837. Then we jump to the swearing in of the first black senator, Hiram Rhodes Revels, in 1870.
A huge moment.
Definitely. Then the literary transition of the writer Claude McKay in 1948. And finally, the rise of the media giant BT in 1980.
It's a real progression. You go from building an intellectual foundation to gaining political representation to finding an artistic voice, and then finally to securing economic and media ownership.
It's the story of power evolving over a century and a half.
It is.
Let's start at the bedrock then. February 25, 1837. This is the founding of Cheyney University, and I think we need to just pause on that year for a second.
Yeah, 1837.
That is more than 2 decades before the Civil War.
That context is so crucial because in 1837, the vast majority of black people in America were enslaved.
Right.
Educating them was not only discouraged, in many places it was outright illegal. It was dangerous. And yet here you have the founding of the Institute for Colored Youth in Pennsylvania.
And looking at the notes, this wasn't just some small grassroots effort. There was serious capital behind it.
Serious capital. It was established via a $10,000 bequest from a Quaker philanthropist named Richard Humphreys.
Wow.
Now you have to adjust for inflation and economic scale. $10,000 in 1837 is a fortune. That's a proper endowment.
And what was the exact mission? Because usually when you hear about education for Black Americans in the 19th century, you think of trade schools, right? You think of the mechanic arts.
And that was definitely part of it. Humphreys wanted to design a school to educate people of African descent. And yes, the original curriculum focused on trades, agriculture, shoemaking. But the goal was specifically to prepare them to be teachers. He wasn't just trying to create workers. He was trying to create a class of people who could uplift others.
Right. It's that teach a man to fish concept, but scaled up to an institutional level.
Precisely. And the geography matters, too. In 1902, the Institute moved to George Cheyney's farm, which was about 275 acres.
Okay.
That name stuck, and it eventually became Cheyney University of Pennsylvania. The real headline here is that this is the oldest historically black college and university, the oldest HBCU in America. This is where the chain starts.
And when you look at who came out of there or who ran it, you see that chain forming almost immediately. I really want to talk about Fannie Jackson Coppin.
Oh, absolutely.
She served as principal from 1869 to 1902.
She is a titan in this story. She was born into slavery, bought her own freedom, graduated from Oberlin, which was completely unheard of at the time.
Yeah.
And then she took the helm at Cheyney. She modernized the curriculum, moving it away from just those mechanic arts toward a much more classical education. But what really stands out to me is her philosophy on character.
I actually have the quote right here. She said that however brilliant a person may be intellectually, he must be reliable. He must be trustworthy.
Reliability. Keep that word in mind. For Coppin, education wasn't just about being smart. It was about being a pillar of the community.
Right.
It was about respectability. This idea that you have a duty to represent the race well. That value system is the very first link in the chain.
And the Miles proves that strategy worked. You have Octavius Cotho, the activist and valedictorian of the class of 1858. You have Ed Bradley, the journalist. And you have Bayard Rustin, the strategist behind the civil rights movement.
Exactly. Without Cheyney, maybe you don't get a Bayard Rustin.
Yeah.
And if you don't get a Bayard Rustin, do you even get the March on Washington? That's the core of the unbroken chain argument. There are no senators or media moguls later in the timeline without this academic foundation laid in 1837.
Which brings us perfectly to the next link. So you have the education, now you need the political power. We jump from 1837 to February 25, 1870.
The political breakthrough. This is the day Hiram Rhodes Revels was seated as the first black U.S. senator.
Now, I know we see firsts all the time in history books, but the context of this specific seat, it's almost too poetic to be real.
It is the ultimate historical irony. You seriously couldn't write this in a movie script because no one would believe it.
Right.
Hiram Rhodes Revels was elected to fill the Senate seat for Mississippi. That specific seat had been vacant since 1861.
And who sat in it before it was vacant?
Jefferson Davis.
The president of the Confederacy.
The man who led a war specifically to keep black people as property. 5 years after that war ends, a black man, a minister and an educator, walks into the U.S. Senate and sits in Jefferson Davis's chair.
Imagine the atmosphere in that room. The psychological shockwaves that must have sent through the old guard.
It was cataclysmic for them. It wasn't just a political defeat, it was a complete overturning of their world order.
Yeah, it proved that the diaspora's voice was now constitutional.
Exactly. It validated their humanity on the highest legislative floor in the country.
So we've moved from the classroom at Cheyney to the Senate floor with Revels. Now let's move to the third link.
No single space project
February 25, 1948.
will be more impressive to mankind
The architectural space
or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
Of Claude
I believe
McKay.
that
Right, and just to be totally accurate with the biography, McKay actually passed away in May of 1948, but the source uses February 25th as the anchor date for his transition in this timeline.
Okay, got it.
This represents the literary link, the artistic voice.
Claude McKay is such a fascinating figure. Born in Jamaica, comes to the U.S. studies at Tuskegee and Kansas State.
Right.
But then he basically drops the agriculture track that Booker T. Washington championed and goes straight into the Harlem Renaissance.
He provided the fire. You have to understand, before this era, a lot of black writing was very careful. It was trying to prove, hey, we are just like you.
That respectability politics again.
Exactly. But McKay didn't care about that. Look at his 1919 poem, If We Must Die.
Written during the Red Summer of racial violence.
Right. It wasn't a poem about submission or pleading for mercy. It was a literal call to arms. Like, men will face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back.
Wow.
That shifted the entire psychology of resistance.
But he wasn't just a protest poet. And this is where we start to see some cracks in that unbroken chain, or at least some serious internal debate.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote the best-selling novel Home to Harlem in 1928. And the quote-unquote elite black leadership, they didn't exactly love it.
I hated it. This is his famous beef with W.E.B. Du Bois.
Right.
Du Bois was all about the talented 10th.
Right.
The idea that the top 10% of black society should lead the way with high morals, education, perfect conduct, to uplift the race.
The Fannie Jackson Coppin approach, reliability.
Exactly. And then here comes Claude McKay writing Home to Harlem, which depicts the complete underside of urban life. Prostitutes, gamblers, drinkers, the nightlife.
He wanted to capture the energy of what he called uprooted black vagabonds.
And Du Bois' reaction was visceral. He famously said Home to Harlem made him feel like he needed a bath.
He called it filth, right?
Yeah.
Filth. That is a harsh review.
It's brutal, but it's a crucial moment. It's the tension between respectability politics, presenting a clean image to white America, and realism, documenting life as it actually is, messy parts and all.
And McKay was definitely complex. The source notes he was involved with the Communist Party, traveled to Russia, where he was treated like a rock star, but later became totally disillusioned with it.
Yeah, he converted to Catholicism near the end of his life, too.
And his sexuality as well, right? Scholarly consensus points to him being bisexual, which is hinted at in his novel Banjo, and him posing for the Cubist painter André Lotte.
So he represents the artistic voice that just refuses to be boxed in. He's saying, I don't have to be respectable to be valid.
Right. And that debate, propaganda versus art respectability versus reality, that is the direct precursor to the massive cultural war we see in the final link of the chain.
Which brings us to February 25, 1980, the launch of Black Entertainment Television, or BE.
This is the economic and media engine. If Revels sees the podium and McKay sees the pen, Robert L. Johnson sees the signal.
I love that. And the origin story of BDAT is pure business instinct. It didn't start in a boardroom, it started in a taxi.
It did. Robert Johnson was a lobbyist for the cable industry. He's sharing a cab with another passenger who shows him a proposal for a cable channel dedicated to the elderly.
And Johnson sees the gap immediately. He takes the concept and mentally swaps elderly for black.
Right.
He realized that advertisers were ignoring a massive underserved market. If you can slice the cable pie for seniors, you could certainly slice it for African Americans.
But having the idea is one thing, getting the capital is another, and this is where the unbroken chain gets very corporate. he didn't fund this with bake sales.
No, he went to John Malone, head of TCI, the cable giant. Malone invested $500,000 as a loan and equity mix.
Wow.
Now, Johnson is very clear about this in our sources. He says this wasn't a handout. It was enlightened self-interest.
Meaning the cable companies needed him just as much as he needed them.
Exactly. At that time, cable companies were trying to get franchises in big cities. Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia. City councils in those places were becoming increasingly black. If the cable operators could say, look, we're carrying a black-owned network, they were way more likely to get the contract.
So BET launches on Feb 25, 1980. It starts small, just 2 hours on Friday nights, mostly gospel and old movies. But it explodes.
It becomes an empire.
Yeah.
You get magazines like Emerge and YSB, jazz channels, restaurants.
Good.
And eventually, Johnson sells it to Viacom for $3 billion, making him the first African-American billionaire.
So on paper, this is the ultimate victory. The chain is complete. We have the money. We have the ownership.
Right.
And here is where the deep dive gets complicated. Ownership of the image doesn't always mean the image is what the community wants.
No. And this brings us right to the Civil War of Values.
Yeah.
We have a thesis in our source stack titled An Analysis of Attitudes and Values via BT Programming.
Yeah.
And it argues that while Johnson won the economic game, the cultural cost was incredibly high.
This is the pre-Viacom versus post-Viacom debate. The feeling that the programming shifted from uplifting to, well, something else.
The thesis suggests a shift away from those old school values, the Fannie Jackson Coppin values of respect, education, dignity, toward what the author calls the barrel house mentality.
Barrel house, that's a very specific term.
It comes from Dr. Yvonne Thornton's memoir. Her mother used it to describe people who were always dancing and drinking, living for the moment, as opposed to people striving. The argument is that beat icons, especially in the music video era, began to glorify that barrel house culture because, quite frankly, it's sold.
The thesis cites some specific examples that really illustrate this divide. There's a Chris Rock routine, black people versus, well, the N-word.
Right. And while that's a comedy bit, it touched a very raw nerve. Rock was articulating an internal civil war.
Yeah.
He was saying there's a group trying to build and educate and another group that glories in ignorance. The thesis links this to music videos that celebrated the hustler lifestyle, or songs like Bone Thugs and Harmony's First of the Month.
Which is essentially an anthem about receiving welfare checks.
Welfare carols, as Rock called them. So you have this jarring contrast. In 1837, the goal is to prove we are reliable, educated teachers.
Right.
1948, Du Bois wants to prove we are cultured. But by 2000, the dominant media image being exported to the world on a black-owned or black-founded network is often anti-intellectual and hyper-sexualized.
And it wasn't just a matter of taste. People felt it was eroding history. There was the Russell Simmons controversy mentioned in the notes.
The Harriet Tubman parody.
Yeah, that was hard to watch.
It was a sex tape parody involving Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
Russell Simmons produced it for his YouTube channel. The backlash was instantaneous.
I can imagine.
Descendants of Tubman called it crude and insensitive. You had artists like Lil Wayne making references to Emmett Till and Malcolm X in lyrics that caused families to demand apologies.
It feels like the chain got twisted. Like we secured the platform, but we lost the message.
That's the central paradox. Robert Johnson argues that he created a business. He gave people what they wanted to watch. He built wealth that allowed him to do other things. But the critics argue at what cost? Did we trade the talented tenth for the marketable millions?
And speaking of doing other things, Johnson didn't stay in media. He took that wealth and pivoted. And I think this is where the unbroken chain tries to repair itself.
Yes. Johnson moved into private equity and created something called the RLJ rule. It's modeled after the NFL's Rooney Rule.
Which requires teams to interview minority candidates for head coaching jobs, right?
Exactly. The RLJ rule challenges companies to voluntarily interview at least 2 qualified minority candidates for managerial openings or vendor contracts.
So he's trying to hack the system.
He's addressing the access gap.
Yeah.
Johnson's philosophy is totally blunt. I'm not the only smart guy in the country who is African American.
Yeah.
He argues that the problem isn't a lack of talent. It's that minorities aren't in the deal flow. They aren't at the country clubs or the board meetings where the hiring actually happens.
He uses the Jackie Robinson analogy in the notes.
He does. He says Jackie Robinson didn't just play baseball. He changed the nature of the game. He brought a different style, a different energy. Johnson argues that diversity in business brings new intellect and new markets. So in a way, he's trying to build a new kind of chain one, based purely on access to capital and corporate boardrooms.
So let's zoom out and look at this whole picture. We've unpacked this unbroken chain of February 25th. It's a wild trajectory.
It really is. 1837, Cheyney University, we established the intellectual foundation we must learn.
Right.
1870, Hiram Revels, we established political validation. We must govern.
Yeah.
1948, Claude McKay, we established the artistic voice. We must tell our truth, however messy.
Exactly.
In 1980, BAT, we established the economic engine. We must own the distribution.
But as we've seen, it's not a straight lineup. Each step brought new complications.
Absolutely. The move from the classroom to the boardroom involves trade-offs. We went from Fannie Jackson Coppin preaching reliability to a media landscape that found profit in dysfunction.
Yeah.
But the chain is still there. It's just evolving.
It really makes you wonder what the next link looks like. If we are sitting here on February 25, 2026, what is the February 25th event of the future?
That is the big question. We've done education, politics, art, and money. But based on everything we've looked at today, I think about where that capital goes next.
What do you mean?
Well, what if the next link isn't a single person or a single network? What if it's decentralized ownership? You know, the RLJ rule focuses on corporate boardrooms, but the future of power might be entirely outside the traditional corporate structure.
Like AI-driven equity or decentralized autonomous organizations where the community actually owns the algorithm.
Exactly. A system where the financial upside and the ethical standards aren't at war with each other because the audience is the board of directors. The chain doesn't just have to go forward, it can reinvent the nature of the links entirely.
A full circle moment where the capital finally matches the original values.
That's the hope.
Well, that gives you plenty to think about as you head out into this Wednesday. It's not just a random date on the calendar, it's a legacy. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure. Keep connecting the dots.